3 months later, this COVID stuff is really messing up the parts supply. I waited, yeah, like 3 months for this piston kit for this little CRF70, and I even ended up, I have gaskets, top end gaskets on order, some aftermarket ones, and they're still on back order. Like, you can't get them in Canada right now. It's friggin' nuts. But anyway, initially I had called Honda and they said a few months for the piston kit and the gaskets as well, but I contacted them recently and they ended up having them in stock finally, so I was like, okay, we'll just get them. But anyway, I can hardly remember how this or what I last got to on this little thing. So I had cleaned the head, I dumped it in my bucket of jet fuel, and I removed the valves, and I replaced the valve seals themselves, little rubber guys in there, and scraped off what I could in the exhaust port, the carbon and whatnot. Cleaned up just quickly lapped the seats, but they really weren't that bad. So the head's clean, I got all the gasket surfaces prepared. The cylinder, yeah, I'm essentially at the point where we go to check ring and gap before we start installing everything. Before you go installing any new piston, it's make sure you check these gaps on the new rings going in as well. Otherwise, you're going to cause big problems. But I wrote down what we're looking for here. So the top ring, this is all in millimeters, by the way, 0.05 to 0.2. Same for the second. And the oil, it's not you're not measuring the corrugated one. You're measuring yeah, you can't really measure this guy too well. You're measuring this and its partner. Make sure you check this before installing new stuff. And to do that, Honda wants them put in from the bottom of the cylinder, so I got it here, and they just say, they don't really give a measurement in the manual I see. So you just set the ring in. We'll do the top old one first. This thing is very worn. You'll see in a second. Start it. Old piston to just make sure it's seated squarely in there. Like, look at that. That's not even I could jam my whole feeler gauge set in that gap right there. Anyway, that's why this bike was running so poorly and burning so much oil. So I got the new rings here. Here's these two without question, or these three, I guess you could say. This is the oil ring. These two are much thinner and smaller than these two, and if you're wondering which one goes on the top, which one goes on the bottom, Pro X, this is usually every piston manufacturer will send their little instructions with you. But you can see right here, the top rings usually have a bevel on the inside edge, a very slight bevel, and the second rings usually are a little more squared off. So these, it's really hard to tell because they're so small. Another way you can tell, it's hard to tell with the camera right now. This is like, I don't know, it's heat treated or anodized. It's a different color, whereas this one's black. This feels thicker, a little more square. Usually, again, this isn't the case for everything, so make sure you look it up. Black colored ones that are thicker and kind of sharper is the middle ring, and this guy would be the top. But if you were to look at the end, this one does have a very, very subtle taper, or a beveled edge to it. Again, my camera's not going to focus on my phone, so you just have to take my word for it. But this is the top ring, this purplish looking one here, purple brown guy. This is good, the middle ring, and then these, it's pretty obvious. This corrugated one just gets sandwiched in between these two guys. All right, let's check the gap on the new ones. So I don't think I really need to show you the whole process of measuring ring and gap. Most of you should know how to do that already. Here's what I got. Actuals are here, what we're shooting for is here, so we're above nominal a little bit, but we're well within the service limit. So let's go to the next step. Right, next is let's install the rings on the piston itself. I've got a little diagram here of how they show it in the manual. So this is my perfect circle here. It's very nice, I know. I've got the piston sitting as this is sitting. The first ring, or the top ring, the gap is going to be over here somewhere. The second is going to be over here, about 120 degrees away. Top oil and bottom oil. I don't see a gap in the manual for the corrugated actual oil control ring, so I don't think there's really a right or wrong place to put this, but the gap, see, it's right here. I might just put it either here or over here, just kind of to get it out of the way of all the other gaps. You don't want them all lining up. You'll lose power, first of all, and a better chance of, well, blow by is what's causing the low power, and it might burn some more oil which we're trying to fix here in the first place. Let's load up this cute little piston here with some brand new ring-a-ding-dings. With piston loaded up, new rings, it's time to throw it in the bike. So get yourself a can of diced tomatoes because we got to lube the wrist pin. It's actually Rotella, just a little bit of Rotella oil in there. And we're going to put it on the wrist pin and then clip the piston onto the connecting rod. Now putting these clips in can be a bit tedious. Use a pair of smooth jaw pliers to help you put it in there. You'll get it eventually. Always do one on the bench because it's easier than doing two on the bike, especially down on your knees on that CRF70. Put some diced tomatoes on everything that needs it before we assemble it. The pin should just slide through without hammering on it or anything. And then go ahead and put your other clip in, and again, make the gap, slide the gap around so that it's away from the cutout window. Little baby pistons installed. Before we go closing her up, make sure the rings gaps are pointed where you want them to be, so refer back to the diagram here. And because we were fiddling around with it, the rings might have moved a little bit. So now's a good time to just double check before she gets closed right up. So we got the cylinder base gasket here and the cylinder itself. Make sure you spread diced tomatoes all around in here after you've cleaned it out. I'm not sure whether I mentioned this or not, but I wish I had a small enough hone to get in here to clean this guy up. But this bore itself, it's like, well, it's 47 millimeters, and freedom speak, that's what, it's like 1 3/4 inch or something like that. So I wish I could clean it up to put some new cross hatching in it. There looks to be a bit of a line in there. You really can't feel it at all. Ideally, I would want to scuff it up a little bit though, but it'll be just fine. Usually you're not putting new cross hatching in, you're not trying to cut or wear away at the bore too much. It's essentially you're just deglazing the cylinder. So I don't have a hone that small, so I just use a little piece of Scotch-Brite just to rough it up, and make sure you clean the bore out really well afterwards, because you'd be surprised with the shit that comes off of even a Scotch-Brite. So I'm gonna do that, gonna rub it with some diced tomatoes and get this gasket on. Pro tip for gaskets: if you mess up and you go to take this back apart right away or something like that, I always grease the gasket surfaces a little bit, just enough to put a film on it. I just use this stuff, and you can save a gasket next time it comes off. I know you're not supposed to, but again, this is the real world, right? Like on this little wee dirt bike, if a guy needed to get back in there, he's going to be thanking me, or even the next rebuild, you'll be thanking yourself that you greased this, because you won't have to scrape it off as much. And you don't need to drown the gasket in grease. You just need to kind of work it in. Just a film on there is all you really need. Slide it over the studs. Make sure you feed the cam chain through along with the piston. Don't forget these little O-rings. These are the Honda part numbers, obviously. This 35-000. This one is the cylinder base. So that one goes kind of right there. And then this guy on top of the cylinder in this little embossed crevasse right there. So don't forget these before putting it all together, otherwise you're gonna have a shitty oil leak. Just press that seal into position. It should kind of stay there itself, but keep an eye on it obviously as you're installing the cylinder. And again, this is tedious. This took me probably about 5 minutes. I straddle the bike because it's easiest to do that way. But you'll get it. Compress the rings, turn the flywheel to help push the piston up through the cylinder. It's nice and tight, and it didn't want to go on that easy, but you'll get it. And before you seat the cylinder the whole way, feed the chain through. Then install the little idler, chain idler. There's a washer under the head of this, the bolt itself, so make sure you don't lose that too. Alright, next is the head. And also very important on the note I forgot to mention before, this is the kind of squared off O-ring that seals the cylinder to the cylinder head, along with obviously the metal gasket. In this guy, you have to, don't lose this when you take it apart. There's this little washer, and this fits inside of here just to kind of give it some structure. So anyway, just a point to mention, don't lose this. Then assemble the head on the bench before we put it in the bike. So the cam sprocket can technically be put on two ways, 180 degrees out, but you can't physically install it wrong because the lobes would be pushing down the rockers, and you wouldn't be able to even get it to spin that way. So it is, in a sense, foolproof, but essentially the lobes need to be facing down, and you install these rockers, push the pins in all the way. Again, everything's coated in a fresh layer of oil. Seat them in all the way, and then with the lobes facing down, you can be sure that you'll get the timing right. Some of the pins the rocker pins, it might just need a little bit of help to get in. And there we are. So the lobes, you can't see them in the head, but they are facing straight down. So make sure the gasket's there before we close this up. Once again, slide the chain through, pull it out, and it'll kind of just sit off to the side. This arrow on this end cap goes down, and this copper washer is different than the other three, and it goes on that stud right there. And then there's a nut that looks different than the others, and it goes on that stud right there. Don't ask me why, but check the IPC, and that's how it is. Torque those nuts down to any one of these values depending on your wrench. And then the two bolts, the one that holds the cylinder to the case, and this one here, make sure you tighten them down too. You can't get a socket on them, so use a wrench. And then we'll time it up here. So there's a T marked on this flywheel and a cutout in the engine case, so that has to be lined up together. And you can do this without removing the tensioner assembly. It's really not that hard. So what I do is I push the chain. It'll kind of sit up there around the bearing housing, and then you use a little wee screwdriver to start the sprocket with the circle, the timing circle facing directly forward, and it should line up with the cutout in the head itself. And then you just kind of wiggle it around, and it will seat in there. And as you can see, it just needs a little bit of a prying, ever so slightly, to snap it onto the camshaft. And then you install these bolts here, torque them down, and double check your timing marks when you're all said and done. The T needs to line up, and that circle on the sprocket needs to line up, and it's really not that hard. And it's just a matter of firing everything else on. The through bolt for that cover on the other side, make sure that tang is resting on the top of the stop, and there's the torque value for that one there too. You'll want to torque that one properly, just to save your own skin. Attach the intake elbow, attach the exhaust, and then I'm going to give her a run. Here's our warm compression test. Squeezing about, I don't know, 140 psi now. Not bad. Not too bad. Anyway, fellas, that's it for this video. Hope you learned something, and catch you next time.